Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. It's a day of celebration. Many of you, I'm sure, are celebrating the festival of Raksha Bandhan. Team Firstpost is celebrating that and more. Today, we've crossed 2 million subscribers on YouTube. This is arguably the fastest growing news platform, and we can't thank you enough for fueling this growth. All those of you who join us every day to watch this show and more, thank you. We launched Vantage 7 months ago, and these have been some very rewarding 7 months for us. So from the entire team here, heartfelt gratitude. Now to the news, and there's a lot of it tonight. Ukraine's biggest ever attacks on Russia as Putin decides to go to China. Europe's record imports of Russian gas since the war began, so much for their sanctions and their lectures. Is India becoming more influential? Is Prime Minister Modi taking the right calls on the world stage? We'll bring you the findings of a Pew Research survey. India's moon mission has found sulfur and other elements on the lunar surface. After football, golf and Formula One, is Saudi Arabia taking over tennis? One more African country has reported a coup, why Netflix is making a pivot to gaming, and why burger joints in the US are being taken to court. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. Turkish Foreign Minister to visit Russia tomorrow. Ankara's top diplomat held talks with Ukrainian officials last week. Turkish President Erdogan is also due to visit Moscow to meet President Putin. The talks will focus on reviving the Black Sea grain deal. Australia sets a date for a historic referendum on indigenous rights. Voting will be held on the 14th of October and it will be compulsory. It's a watershed moment in Canberra's relationship with its Aboriginal minorities. If passed, indigenous Australians will be recognised in the Constitution for the first time. Hurricane Idalia makes landfall in Florida. Hundreds evacuated, many without power. More than 800 flights have been cancelled. Some airports in the state have had to shut down operations. Idalia is the strongest hurricane to hit Florida's Big Bend region in more than 125 years. The proof is in the fish. Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida and his ministers eat seafood from Fukushima. Kishida calls it safe and delicious. The South Korean president also adds seafood to his menu to show it's safe. Japan is facing backlash for releasing treated water from the Fukushima nuclear plant. Iran bans a weightlifter for life over a handshake with his Israeli competitor. Mostafa Rajai shook hands with Israel's Maxim Swirsky at the World Championships in Poland. Iran does not recognize Israel and prohibits all contact between Iranian and Israeli athletes. And are you ready for a 7-minute cancer treatment jab? Patients in England will be the first in the world to access it. The state-run National Health Service, or NHS, will roll out the injection soon. It will cut treatment time by up to 75%. Ukraine is taking the war into Russia. Their weapons of choice are drones. Kiev conducted fresh attacks today. Their biggest assault on Russia since the war began. Ukraine struck 6 regions in Russia, and with each strike, they're trying to break Russian defenses and penetrating deeper into Russia. In today's operation, they reached as far as 600 kilometers inside Russian territory. It was one of Ukraine's most daring missions yet. What do they hope to achieve with this? Can drones change the trajectory of this conflict? That's our lead story tonight, and we'll start with some pictures. These are from the Pskov region. Russia has an airport here. Last night, it was targeted by Ukrainians. Their drones destroyed multiple military planes. Going by one claim, 2 planes burst into flames. And what kind of planes are these? Transport planes used by the military. Pskov is nowhere close to Ukraine. It is more than 600 kilometers into Russia. It falls closer to the Estonian border. And this was not the only target. 5 more regions came under attack. Oryel, Bryansk, Ryazan, Kaluga, and the Moscow region. Russia declared that it will hit back.
The actions of the Ukrainian regime will not go unpunished. Russian law enforcement structures are investigating and properly documenting all facts of shelling by Ukrainian militants of Russian regions and their other criminal actions.
And they did. Moscow launched drones and missiles towards Kiev. It was Russia's biggest bombardment in months, but it was not effective. Ukraine's air defenses managed to drown all 28 missiles fired by Russia, also 15 out of the 16 Russian drones that came their way. And yet there were casualties. At least 2 people died in Ukraine. They were struck by the falling debris. From the looks of it, this is going to get worse. So expect more attacks in the coming days. Because Ukraine's drone war is intensifying, Kiev never takes credit for these strikes. But they never deny their involvement either. Look at this map. It shows all the drone attacks Russia has suffered till early August. A large number of them happened near the border. Now look at the southern region, that's Crimea. This year, it has witnessed a high number of drone attacks. And that's not all. Drones have also targeted the Russian capital, Moscow. Also caused damage in central Russia. These strikes are disrupting daily life in the country. It happened today in Pskov. The airport here is used for civilian flights too. All flights from this airport were cancelled today. And that's not all. 3 other airports had to be closed. Although that disruption was brief, at least 12 flights had to be diverted. And that is the idea really behind the use of drones. It puts pressure on ordinary Russians. Ukraine wants them to feel that the war has come to their doorstep. They want Russia to feel vulnerable. And drones prove to be effective in this pursuit. They're small, they're fast, and they can fly long distances. Plus, it seems Russian radars are unable to catch them. But that's the limited purpose they serve. Drone strikes will not lead to a Ukrainian victory. They will, at best, give them good headlines and expose the limits of Russian defenses. Off the record, Ukraine's military concedes that these attacks have a limited impact. What they do is impede Russian advances, slow down their forces, and offer a temporary advantage to Kiev. When Moscow decides, it can muster the means to counter this. Putin has resourceful allies to fall back on, like the president of China, Xi Jinping. In fact, the Russian president is planning to visit China soon. He's got an invite from the Chinese president. In October, Xi Jinping is hosting the Belt and Road Forum, and Putin will attend the event in person. Why is this noteworthy? Because Putin has been a reclusive leader of late. Since the war began, he's traveled outside Russia only twice, once to visit Iran and the second time to some former Soviet states in Russia's neighborhood. He did not go to the BRICS summit in South Africa. He has also opted out of the G20 summit in India. In fact, on Monday, he called Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi to inform him about this decision. Putin has not traveled overseas since March this year. That's when an arrest warrant was issued in his name. The International Criminal Court had found him guilty of war crimes. So Putin has become more selective about his travel plans. Reports say he's willing to visit only those countries where his security and safety is guaranteed. And clearly, he deems China to be safe. His last visit to China was in February 2022, less than 3 weeks before he invaded Ukraine. That's when Putin and Xi declared a no-limits partnership. A Russia-China no-limits partnership. The relationship has only deepened since then. Putin is counting on support from Xi, both for the war in Ukraine and for the Russian economy. So far, Beijing's support has been largely diplomatic. Will the October visit change this? We'll be tracking it for you. So the war is escalating and spilling over. What does that mean? It means neither side is short of money. If you ask the West, they will blame India and China for it. We buy Russian oil, hence Putin's war chest keeps getting bigger. But turns out, Europe is doing the same thing. They're buying record amounts of Russian LNG. LNG is liquefied natural gas. Until last year, Europe imported very little LNG. Instead, they bought piped gas from Russia. But after the war came sanctions. European countries decided to stop buying Russian oil. How very noble. The brave Europeans sacrificing a comfortable winter to fight Vladimir Putin. But that's only half the story. After banning Russian oil, Europe started buying Russian LNG, and lots of it. I have some numbers for you. Europe's LNG imports from Russia are up 40%, 40, compared to 2021. And 2021 was before the war. During the same period, global imports from Russia have also increased. But that increase is only of 6%. Do you see the difference here? Global imports of Russian LNG increased by 6%, but European imports increased by 40%. And how much was this trade worth? Around $5.3 billion in 7 months. At this rate, Europe could spend $10 billion on Russian gas this year. Now, to give you some context, Russia's defense budget is around $100 billion, and Europe is paying 10% of that for Russian gas. So much for sanctions. Spain, Belgium and France are the biggest buyers. France bought around 4.5 million cubic meters of Russian LNG, Belgium 7 million and Spain around 7.5 million. Most of this gas is coming from a joint venture called Yamal LNG. It's a majority stake. In fact, its majority stake is being held by a Russian company called Novatek. The rest is spread globally. France's Total Energy has a stake. So does China's gas giant CNPC, and this trade continues to flourish. Imports are not just up compared to 2021, they are up compared to last year as well. There is an increase of around 2%, which means Europe's gas imports are not slowing down after 2022, they're gathering speed. In fact, Russia is the second biggest supplier of LNG to Europe. The first is America. Around 16% of Europe's LNG comes from Russia, from its own enemy. So why isn't Brussels doing something about it? Well, they say they have a plan. The plan is to phase out all Russian fossil fuels by 2027. Oil, piped gas, liquid gas, they will stop buying all of it by 2027. Until then, it's all fair. In March this year, Spain's energy minister highlighted this. She called the situation absurd. She also asked Spanish companies to not buy Russian LNG. It made no difference though. And why would it? Energy companies will listen to laws. They will not listen to appeals and suggestions. So what is stopping Europe from sanctioning companies for buying Russian LNG? Just think about it. Russian oil is sanctioned. Russian coal is sanctioned. Even Russian cigarettes are sanctioned. But Russian LNG is free to use. Sums up Europe's hypocrisy. Their sanctions are at best half-hearted, filled with loopholes and backdoors. Just look at Russian crude. Europe says we don't want anything to do with Russian crude oil. We won't import or refine it. But what if other countries refine Russian crude and ship it to Europe? Well, then it's fine. Countries like India, China and Turkey have been selling refined Russian crude to Europe. Europeans have been criticizing it. They have called for sanctions, but at the end of the day, they keep buying the same oil. It's like taking bribes. You won't take the money directly, but you'll take expensive gifts bought with that money. In reality, it's all the same. And don't get me wrong, Europe is free to buy whatever they want. Russian oil, Russian LNG, Russian vodka, anything they like. But to be honest, they have to get off the moral high horse and not criticize others who also buy from Russia. You may remember what Ukraine said. It said India had blood on its hands for buying Russian oil. By that logic, doesn't Europe also have bloody hands? You can't say one thing and do the other. But that is Europe's playbook. They have promised military aid worth $28 billion to Ukraine. I know it's a lot, but at the same time, they're also spending almost $10 billion on Russian gas. They're effectively funding Putin's war. The question is why? For starters, many European countries had elections recently. In fact, European energy prices were a big issue. So banning Russian LNG may have backfired then. It could have triggered an energy crisis. But that was last year. What's stopping them now? European gas storage containers are more than 90% full, so the winter is taken care of. Yet the Russian LNG imports keep rising, and don't expect anyone to question this booming trade. Because when Europe does it, it's a strategic choice. When others do it, it's blood money. Maybe this attitude explains our next story. It's about an opinion poll conducted across 24 countries, most of them from the G20. Now, every opinion poll has a question or a set of questions. This one was linked to India. How do you view India's position in the world? Has New Delhi's influence increased recently? Things like that. That's what the survey was about. And the answers reveal some interesting trends. Most Indians are upbeat about the trajectory. They think we're on the right track. Let me show you the numbers. Around 68% of Indian respondents say the country is becoming more influential. 19% say it's about the same. Only 13% say India is becoming weaker. And what about the leadership? Around 79% Indians have a favourable view of the Prime Minister. Around 55% have very favourable views. They believe Prime Minister Modi is taking the right calls at the world stage. These numbers are very important, especially coming at this time. India is all set to host the G20 Leaders' Summit. There is more global interest in India's policy and positions. In that context, public opinion is important. Do the Indian people support and approve of the current direction? Going by this survey, they do. And what about people outside India? What do they have to say? By and large, India is seen favourably. Around 46% of respondents held this view. They saw India positively, 46%. Around 34% held unfavourable views of India, and the rest were undecided. Now, it's hard to judge public perceptions of a country, especially a country like India. We are not part of any treaty alliance. We don't have a history of intervening abroad, so public perception can be tricky. This survey, for example, studied 30,000 people. It's a reasonable size for an opinion poll. But remember, the G20 is much bigger. Its total population is almost 4.7 billion people. Even within that, some countries were not polled, like Russia, China, and Turkey. Their responses could have affected these numbers. In a good way or bad? Well, that's up for debate. A second question in the survey was about India's influence. Has India become more influential or not? Like I said, around 68% of Indians said yes. And elsewhere, only 28%. So an overwhelming number of Indians believe their country is now more influential on the world stage. But people outside India don't agree. Now to the third important question. What do you think of the Prime Minister? This was part of the survey. Again, there is a split. 79% of Indian respondents supported him. And outside India, around 37% supported him. Now, these are the three more major questions, from the poll. If you dig deeper, some trends emerge. Like, where is India losing popularity? Europe is one place. 10 countries from the continent were part of the survey. 3 of them had more negative views of India than positive. 1 was split equally. At first look, this is not really a problem. Just 3 out of 10 countries. That could easily be a sampling error. But the devil is in the detail. In 2007, 29% of French people held an unfavourable view of India, 29%. In 2023, it has increased to 39%. Then we have Spain. In 2007, 34% of Spaniards held negative views of India, and now around 49%. In Germany, it has increased from 29 to 38%. In the UK, from 9 to 30%. In Poland, from 24 to 34%. What explains this slide for India? One reason could be the war in Ukraine. India has not condemned or criticized Russia's invasion. Most leaders in the West have accepted this, but their people, maybe not as much. Imagine you're an average citizen living in Europe. After the war, your energy bills are higher. Your inflation is higher, your government is spending more on defense than social welfare. Naturally, you would be unhappy, and perhaps some of that anger is rubbing off on India. But the problem is not just in Europe, it's also in Latin America. Mexico is the only G20 member country with a favourable view of India. In Brazil, 43% hold negative views. In Argentina, 34%. And honestly, it's a bit surprising. Brazil and India are part of the BRICS group. Argentina is joining next year. So public perception in these countries is important for New Delhi. Same with South Africa, another BRICS member. 51% respondents in South Africa shared negative views on India. And this is really surprising. We have historical ties with South Africa. This is a country that shares so many values with India. Yet the public opinion is not good. Like I said, these numbers may not be 100% accurate, but there are lessons to be learned here. Engagement and investment is important. If you invest in a relationship, it will give you dividends. Case in point, Israel. It is the country with the highest favourable outlook on India, around 71%. 71% Israelis hold a positive view of India. It's a relationship India has worked on. In 2017, Prime Minister Modi became the first Indian PM to visit the country, the first in 7 decades. We are also part of the I2U2 grouping, India, Israel, the United States and the UAE. All of this has built public support for India. Compare this to Latin America. The Prime Minister has visited 3 countries in the last 10 years there. Only one was a standalone trip. The visit to Brazil was for BRICS. The visit to Argentina was for the G20. India's diplomatic presence in the region is also limited. Just 11 missions had been opened from 1947 to 2019. That's simply not enough. You need to be visible for people to like or dislike you. And that's probably the biggest takeaway from this poll, because around 16% of respondents the world over had no opinion on India, neither positive nor negative. And this needs to change. A positive public perception can help build better ties. In the US, for example, the positive view on India is 51%. Hence, there is bipartisan support for India. So don't think people don't matter in foreign policy. And speaking of India's influence, our next story is about Chandrayaan-3. You probably remember how India scripted history last week. It became the first country to land a craft near the lunar South Pole and the fourth nation to land on the moon. Now, India has given the world an even bigger reason to moon over its lunar mission. In a first, India's moon rover Pragyan has confirmed the presence of sulfur on the lunar South Pole. It has also detected the presence of other elements like aluminium, calcium, iron, and oxygen. Why is this discovery a big deal? And what is next on the rover's mind? Our next report tells you.
Have you ever seen this element before? Maybe you haven't, but we can bet that you've used it. This is sulfur, or as many Indonesians like to call it, devil's gold. Yes, they've nicknamed this element, partly due to its yellow color, but also because it's a valuable commodity. Because an Indonesian volcano named Kawah Ijen holds sulfur in large quantities. As the sulfur deposits catch light, they make the volcano come alive with blue fire. This invites a throng of tourists and employment for locals who use it to make a wide range of goods, like car batteries, fertilizer, bleach, and cement detergents. Sulfur is also used in oil refining, water processing, and mineral extraction. Sulfur usually originates in volcanic activities. And do you know what else has volcanoes? The moon. It had a lot of active volcanoes in the past. In fact, many parts of the moon's surface are covered with hardened lava. So, since the 1970s, the world knew that the moon holds sulfur, this yellow element we told you about. But we weren't sure if it was present in the lunar south. We knew about it in theory, but there was no direct evidence. No one knew because no one had been there. It wasn't feasible to confirm this by orbiters studying the moon. Orbiters are spacecrafts that do just that. They orbit, but they don't land on the moon. But guess who just did? India's Chandrayaan-3. It was historic. India became the first nation to land on the lunar south on the 23rd of August. By being there, the Indian rover Pragyan was able to hold scientific experiments, something that's never happened before. It was able to measure elemental composition. And now the rover has struck gold. Devil's gold, to be precise. In a first, it has confirmed the presence of sulfur on the lunar south, and also detected the presence of other elements like aluminum, calcium, iron, chromium, titanium, manganese, silicon, and oxygen. Why is the confirmation of sulfur such a big deal? Because of the stories it will tell. It can reveal insights about the moon. It can tell the world a lot about the moon's formation, as well as its history and evolution. So finding sulfur is a tremendous accomplishment. Chandrayaan-3 has already achieved one of its major objectives. After all, since it landed, the rover has been hard at work. It wanted to study the composition of elements on the lunar south, and it has. But the rover isn't done yet. Since it landed, it's been moonlighting as a hydrogen hunter. Pragyan wants to investigate the presence of hydrogen on the south pole of the moon. It's looking for signs of frozen water. If found, it will be a game changer, one of the greatest discoveries in space. Why is that? Simply put, if you want to send astronauts to the moon, a place with water would be a good spot. It could also open doors to life on the moon. Humans need water to survive. Water can be used to procure oxygen, which will provide air to breathe. Water can also be used to make rocket fuel. It will help people come back to Earth or go somewhere else in the solar system. The opportunities are endless. There's no way to water down its importance. As of right now, no one knows if the rover will be successful in finding frozen water. But on Earth, we continue to look at the bigger picture. And the fact is, Whatever Pragyan does up there will be historic down here.
So ISRO is achieving new milestones. Saudi Arabia too is forging new paths. Tonight we'll tell you about their next big bet, tennis. Riyadh has bought rights to host a major ATP event, the finals of the men's under-21 tournament. The hosting rights are for 4 years. The tournament began in 2017 and since then only Milan has hosted it. But ATP decided to do things differently this time, and ATP is the Association of Tennis Professionals. It's one of the main governing bodies of tennis. ATP launched a bidding process. Many cities were in the running. In the end, Jeddah came out on top. We don't know the value of the deal yet, but the prize money will be hiked. Earlier, the winner took home $1.4 million. This year, the champion will get $2 million. It's an attractive proposition. More prize money will draw the players for sure. But not everyone is thrilled about it. As with any Saudi investment, this one too is not without its share of controversy. The deal is getting a mixed response. Some greats are skeptical, like Chris Evert. There were rumors that the Women's Championship could move to Saudi Arabia too, and this is what Chris Evert said. Obviously, they have the human rights issues and everything, just the way they treat women. I would be against it, but I don't have a vote. So there is some criticism, but it's unlikely to sway Riyadh. Saudi Arabia has big plans. It is betting big money on sports, and the list keeps getting longer. Riyadh's Sovereign Wealth Fund is the driving force behind these investments. It is called the Public Investment Fund, or PIF. It is worth $650 billion. One of its major bets is football. Saudi Arabia is propping up its own league, its own football league. It's called the Saudi Professional League. In June this year, the PIF bought 4 teams in this league. During the summer, the league spent more than $900 million, and this included transfer fees. They snapped up some big players, the likes of Neymar, Karim Benzema, Sadio Mane, and Jordan Henderson, and many others. And of course, we've not forgotten Cristiano Ronaldo. He was transferred in January, and his contract opened the floodgates. The Ronaldo deal alone is said to be worth over $400 million. These acquisitions made quite a splash and invited charges of sports washing. But football is not where the Saudi kingdom began. They've made more investments in Formula One. In 2021, Saudi Arabia hosted its first F1 race. Now this is an annual event. 1 year later, they bought stakes in an F1 team, the Aston Martin F1 team. Again, the money came from the kingdom's Sovereign Wealth Fund, PIF. The PIF picked up a 17% stake. Then we have golf. Again, the PIF took the lead. They created a tournament called Live Golf. Reports say it cost them $2 billion. Players were poached from the PGA and Europe. PGA stands for Professional Golfers Association, the biggest golfing body in America. When the Saudis created Live Golf, the West tried to fight back. Lawsuits were filed. Live Golf players were banned by the PGA. But that fight ended in June. A merger was announced. PGA, Europe's DP World Tour, and Saudi Arabia's Live Golf decided to come together. So the Saudis did not just win this battle, they ended up reshaping the world of golf. And Riyadh's muscle flexing is not limited to professional sports. They're also investing in video games. And they're aggressive on this front too. So far, Saudi Arabia has invested around $7.5 billion. They picked up stakes in leading video game companies, the likes of Electronic Arts, Activision Blizzard, and Take-Two Interactive. So long story short, Saudi Arabia is now a powerhouse in the world of sports. Critics label these investments as sports washing. They say this is a smokescreen to distract from the kingdom's human rights record. But why spend billions of dollars to fix your reputation? Because their future may depend on it. The kingdom wants to use sports as a soft power, and Saudi Arabia won't be the first one to try to do this. Others have done it before them. And this approach has its advantages. Making these bold investments, Riyadh has captured the attention of the world. Major sporting events give the kingdom an international platform, a platform to showcase their culture and tradition. Sports can also be used as a vehicle for hard power. Case in point, India. It is a major cricketing power. Also a big market for the sport. And this puts India in a unique position. The BCCI can throw its weight around when it comes to bilateral matches, like in the case of Pakistan. India does not play any match with the Pakistani team. They face off only at ICC tournaments. And that's the power of sports, really. You can use it to achieve strategic and economic goals, which is what Riyadh is chasing. And at this rate, the juggernaut is hard to stop. We live in a world that is often dominated by mundane news cycles. War, geopolitics, climate change, all very predictable. Very important, but predictable. We talk about it every night. But when it comes to Pakistan, headlines can often border on the absurd. Picture this: a nation on the brink of a power crisis. Citizens setting their electricity bills on fire, protests across the country, all while a pet lioness turns the streets of Karachi into her personal runway. It sounds like a bizarre tale, I know, but it played out in real life in Pakistan. It began last week. People took to the streets to protest. Why? Because of exorbitant electricity bills. They were already struggling with high inflation and soaring unemployment. So the hike in electricity costs was the final nail in the coffin. Protests erupted and spread to many cities, including Karachi, Lahore, Peshawar, Rawalpindi, and Islamabad. Basically, all of Pakistan was up in arms. Some blamed the government, others set fire to their bills. Reports say power bills have doubled from May to July. They've doubled. What explains the steep rise? So there is a lot of protest because of the steep rise in electricity bills, and we were talking about the IMF being linked to this. The new hike has to do with the International Monetary Fund. You see, in the month of June, the IMF agreed on a $3 billion bailout for Pakistan. But that bailout had some conditions, and one of them was to increase the cost of electricity. Pakistan's economy was struggling, inflation was at a record high, even now it is 29%. So the government agreed to all IMF conditions. And that led to the scenes we are witnessing today. Power bills in Pakistan are now higher than the salaries of some people. They simply cannot afford it. So they're burning the bills in protest. And what is the government doing about it? Currently, an interim government is in charge in Pakistan. The caretaker Prime Minister called for an emergency meeting. He asked authorities to take what he called corrective steps and concrete steps. But it has not translated into any relief yet, and it's not surprising. The government in Pakistan has its hands tied, a caretaker government even more so. The way to bring down power bills is to reduce taxes. They cannot do it at this point because it will upset the IMF and jeopardize the bailout package. The next tranche of funds could be delayed or not come at all, and Pakistan must save this deal at all costs. It saved them from a default. It also paved the way for billions of dollars in loans and investments, especially from countries like China and Saudi Arabia. So Pakistan simply cannot risk this IMF bailout. And while the streets turned into makeshift bill bonfires, Pakistan's smoky protest had a new member on Tuesday, a full-grown pet lioness.
We received information that a lion had escaped on Shahra-e-Faisal. Our teams rushed here immediately and rescued it. Praise be to Allah, it is with us safely and no one is in danger now.
Clearly, this wild cat has decided that the protest needed some roaring support. But puns aside, what is a lioness doing on the streets of Karachi? Keeping lions in residential areas is banned in Pakistan, but that has never really stopped its people. In fact, keeping wild cats as pets is quite common in the country. They're seen as symbols of wealth. The rich even operate private zoos. They often parade these cats in public. The lioness too was being transported by its owner. That's when she escaped onto the streets. It took 2 hours to catch her, and it was quite the chase, which brings us to the irony of the situation. On one hand, you have people struggling with inflation, struggling to pay their bills, struggling to afford food. On the other, you have Pakistan's rich, their lions parading the street. You can call it the Great Pakistan Circus. And now we move to Africa, where another coup is taking place, this time in the Central African nation of Gabon. It's an oil-rich nation of just 2.3 million people, and it has one of the highest per capita GDPs in Africa. The coup began early this morning, reportedly just minutes after the latest election results were announced. President Ali Bongo Ondimba won a third term in office. But Gabon's military leaders were not having it. They say the elections were not transparent, so they put Bongo under house arrest. Gabon's military has declared the end of the current regime. It says all institutions of the republic have been dissolved. Our next report brings you the details.
There's a political upheaval taking place in yet another former French colony. The Central African nation of Gabon is the latest to witness a coup. Earlier today, Gabon's military made this announcement.
Nous, forces de défense et de sécurité.
On this day, August 30th, 2023, we, the Defense and Security Forces, meeting within the Committee for the Transition and Restoration of Institutions, CTRI, on behalf of the Gabonese people and guarantor of the protection of institutions, have decided to defend peace by putting an end to the current regime. The general elections of August 26, 2023, as well as the truncated results, are cancelled. The borders are closed until further notice. All institutions of the Republic are dissolved.
The current regime has ended. All institutions are dissolved. How did the people of Gabon react to this news? Many are celebrating. People have taken to the streets to back the military. They are rejoicing after the ouster of President Ali Bongo Ondimba.
Il est porté à la connaissance.
The national and international community is informed that Mr. Ali Bongo Ondimba is being kept under house arrest. He is surrounded by his family and doctors.
The president and his family are reportedly being held at Gabon's presidential palace. They were put under house arrest by the presidential guard. It sounds like a repeat of the situation in Niger. But Gabon's case is a bit different. Gabon has been ruled by the Bongo family for 55 years. President Ali Bongo succeeded his father Omar Bongo after his death in 2009. Bongo Sr. had ruled for almost 42 years. Gabon was a single-party ruled state till 1990. And every election after that has been fraught with allegations of rigging. The same thing was happening in last week's election. Gabon had gone to polls on Saturday. President Ali Bongo was leading. The opposition claimed that the results were rigged, but Bongo was declared the winner early this morning. That's when the military initiated the coup. Just minutes after Bongo was declared the victor, the military announced the end of the current regime. Soon after, gunfire was reportedly heard in Gabon's capital, Libreville. But no reports of violence have emerged since. The people of Gabon seem to be fine with Bongo's ouster. His family is accused of pilfering the nation over the past few decades. Bongo Sr. built a fortune from Gabon's mineral wealth. The country is rich in oil, uranium, and minerals like manganese. These have been exploited over decades to bring wealth to the country. It has the 5th highest GDP per capita in all of Africa. But about a third of Gabon's people are still below the poverty line, which points to grave income disparities. It explains why Gabon's people are happy with the coup, and why the military made this announcement.
Par les autorités compétentes.
An investigation will be carried out by the competent authorities, and those concerned will answer for their actions. Gabonese people, we are finally on the road to happiness. May God and the hands of our ancestors bless Gabon. Honor and loyalty to the fatherland. Thank you.
This isn't the first coup in Gabon. One was attempted back in 1964. Another as recently as 2019, but neither of them succeeded. The 2019 coup attempt was put down internally, and in 1964, France intervened to keep Gabon's rulers in power. France shares good relations with Gabon's leaders. The Bongo family is accused of stashing a lot of their ill-gotten wealth in France. So the reaction from Paris was on expected lines.
France condemns the military coup d'état that is taking place in Gabon. France is closely monitoring the development of the situation on the ground and reaffirms its wish for the election results, once known, to be respected. So we are monitoring this closely.
Like in the past, France wants the president of Gabon reinstated. Remember, before he was ousted, Ali Bongo apparently won this election. So it seems Paris is backing him. But things are different today compared to a few decades ago. France is extremely unpopular in its former colonies. The people of coup-hit Niger, Mali and Burkina Faso have made that clear. In all those countries, anti-France sentiment has been on the rise. French diplomats and troops have been asked to leave. And this has granted legitimacy to the military juntas. Gabon too has a permanent contingent of French troops. But, unlike in the past, they haven't swung into action to reinstate the ousted president. Not yet, anyway. The spreading anti-France sentiment in Africa may restrict French action. So, if Bongo wants to get back his presidency, he may have to rely on local support. But considering the reactions to his arrest, that may be an uphill battle.
Would you play a game on Netflix? Actually, let me rephrase that. Did you know that Netflix actually had games? From 2021, multiple games have been available on the platform. Now, when I say games, temper your expectations. It's not like Call of Duty or Fortnite. These are more basic games. You could only play them on Netflix's mobile application. But that is about to change. The company is planning a major expansion into the world of gaming, and the reason is quite simple: to attract and retain more audience, to keep making money, because right now the business is a bit shaky. You see, not everyone wants to watch a movie or a TV show. Some people like to be more involved, and that's where games come in. And I know gaming consoles have existed for a long time, like the PlayStation or the Xbox, but these tend to be expensive. Netflix, on the other hand, is a subscription. It's like a two-in-one deal. You get TV shows and also games. This month, the company rolled out their first public tests. A few subscribers in the US and Canada got access to Netflix games on TV. These are cloud streaming games. And what does that mean? It means you don't have to download the game. The files will remain in some data center far away. You can stream the game online, like you do with any content on OTT. You don't have to download it to consume it. Other big players have tried cloud gaming before. Google had something called Stadia. It was so bad, they ended up canceling it. Amazon had something called Luna. Again, not a big success. So what makes Netflix think that they can succeed where Google and Amazon failed? Two things. One, Netflix has some good exclusive properties. I'm talking about shows. Cult favorites like Stranger Things or Queen's Gambit. Imagine creating a game based on these shows, or linking the game to storylines on the show. Would you play it then? Maybe the die-hard fans will. In fact, Netflix is already making a show based on the Queen's Gambit. It's a chess simulator game. The second factor is necessity, because Netflix does not have an option. Look at their recent performance. The platform added around 6 million subscribers in the last quarter. Very impressive. But the profits are not matching up. Netflix posted $1.5 billion in profits, which is just 2.7% more than the year before. For an industry leader, that's not enough. And it's not just Netflix. Disney, for example, is even worse. The company is being sued for misleading investors on losses. They reported around $3.7 billion in losses last year. And if that was misleading, $3.7 billion, you can imagine the real damage. The fact is, streaming has its own problems. Its rise during the pandemic was unprecedented, but sustaining that has been tough. Which is why most OTT giants have increased prices. Netflix, Peacock, Hulu, HBO, all of them have made ad-free subscriptions more expensive. But there is a downside to this strategy. You could drive people away from the platform. So streaming giants need to diversify. They can't keep running shows into double-digit seasons. You need something more. Enter games. Netflix already offers around 70 of them on mobile apps, 70 games, 70. But like I said, these are basic ones. They won't attract the hardcore gamers. But maybe that's the plan. The likes of Google and Amazon, invested millions in cloud gaming. Their bet was huge, so was their fall. In contrast, Netflix is starting on a smaller budget, smaller games, and smaller marketing push. Whether it works or not could define the next chapter of streaming. Have you ever felt the sting of betrayal in a relationship? Have you been backstabbed by someone you considered a friend? Well, our last story tonight is about something that hurts even more: betrayal by food, being catfished by misleading marketing. Like when you order a burger that looks mouth-watering on the menu. Its patty looks deliciously meaty and the veggies overflow between the buns. But what do you get? A squishy, flattish, unappealing burger. It's tragic. And our customers have had enough. Popular burger joints in the US, Burger King, McDonald's and Wendy's, are being sued. They're being taken to court. Our next report tells you more.
Beauty lies in the eyes of the burger holder, and they don't seem too happy, especially with Burger King, the famous burger joint. It's called the home of the Whopper, Burger King's flagship burger. At the risk of making you hungry, let's show you what the Whopper advertisements promise. A burger with a grilled, juicy-looking patty, lots of veggies that seem to be overflowing. There's tomatoes, onions, lettuce and dill pickle. But this is what you usually get. There's more bun than burger. Maybe one slice of tomato here, a sliver of lettuce there, and a frail, sad-looking patty. Quite the catfish, isn't it? So it's obvious that customers aren't whooping with joy after eating a Whopper. They feel betrayed and angry, or let's just say hangry, meaning hungry plus angry. And if you've ever seen a hangry person, you know that you need to be scared. So unhappy customers are suing Burger King in the US, claiming that the Whopper burger is too small, and accusing the company of false advertising. Burger King tried getting the case thrown out of court, but a US judge has rejected it, paving the way for a legal fight in court. Burger King is one of many such cases in the US. Customers are fighting over the gap between advertising and the reality of fast food. As we speak, McDonald's is defending a similar lawsuit. So is Taco Bell. The fast food joint was sued last month for selling wraps and pizzas that allegedly contain half the advertised filling. Crunch wraps? More like hollow wraps filled with hollow promises. Bad jokes aside, this is serious business. Each lawsuit seeks at least $5 million in damages. Plaintiffs claim the fault advertising is blatant. They say it's practically a breach of contract. But companies disagree. They argue that they don't need to produce food that looks exactly like the picture. Kind of like posting an Instagram picture with filters. People hardly look like that in real life, and everyone knows that. But what happens when you don't look like your pictures at all? It's the vast difference between this real and reality that's angering people. And why wouldn't it? Food companies aren't just using filters, they've gone 10 steps ahead. Here's what we're talking about. Think about a pizza advert that you saw. You see that stretchy cheese on top? There's a good chance it's glue. Ever noticed those perfectly stacked fluffy pancakes? Or a burger that stands tall? They probably have cardboard discs stacked between them. Ever seen a coffee with the perfect color? Probably contains soy sauce. Or that milkshake that looks extra frothy? It's made from mashed potatoes. What about those extra red glossy strawberries? They have a strong lipstick game. Basically, most of food advertising is deceitful and downright fake. Behind food photos is a stylist whose job is to trick the viewer. They go to extreme lengths to make the food look delicious, and reality is no match for them. The result is betrayed customers. So companies catfishing their consumers, be warned. Hangry customers and empty stomachs would hit firms where it hurts the most: their deep pockets.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. In Madrid, thousands call for the resignation of Spanish football chief Luis Rubiales. Rubiales kissed Spanish national star Jenny Hermoso without her consent at the Women's World Cup final. Meanwhile, Spain is painting the town of Bunol red. The city marked the annual Tomatina festival, where revelers threw tomatoes at each other. And the month of August began with a bright supermoon. It is ending the same way as another one lights up the night sky tonight. This is the last super blue moon until 2037. So catch it while you can. And finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1967, the US Senate confirmed the appointment of Thurgood Marshall to the US Supreme Court. He became the first African-American justice in the top court. We're leaving you with that. Thanks very much for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.